Tinubu's approval ratings are sitting somewhere between uncomfortable and embarrassing. Fuel subsidy gone, Naira in free fall, hardship at levels most Nigerians under 40 have never personally experienced. And yet, political analysts who actually study Nigerian elections, not just Twitter, are not ruling out a Tinubu second term. While everyone is arguing about whether Nigerians can survive this economy, nobody is seriously asking, has Tinubu already built the machine that wins him 2027 regardless? Because here's what I want you to sit with for the next 30 minutes. Winning Nigerian elections has never been primarily about popularity. It's about architecture, structure, money, and the control of institutions that most voters never think about. So the question this video answers is simple. Does Tinubu already have that architecture in place? Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Naija Newsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me because this one gets interesting. To understand what Tinubu is building toward 2027, you have to understand where he started from in 2023, because that election was, by almost any objective measure, the messiest presidential election in Nigeria's Fourth Republic. He won with 37% of the vote. 37%. In a three-horse race with the lowest absolute number of votes for a winning presidential candidate since the return to democracy. The Labour Party's Peter Obi mobilized a generation. Atiku Abubakar held the North, and Tinubu still won because he understood the Electoral Act, the INEC process, and the tribunal system better than his opponent did. The courts validated that win in 2024, but here's what that result actually told us. The APC's traditional coalition is cracking. The Southwest delivered, yes, but the Northeast and Northwest, previously reliable, showed signs of fragmentation. So 2027 isn't just another election cycle for Tinubu. It's a reconstruction project. He needs a bigger coalition, more institutional control, and enough economic wins, or the appearance of economic wins, to neutralize the anger on the streets. The trigger for why this conversation is happening right now is specific. The APC has already begun state-level mobilization. Governors are being quietly assessed, defection conversations are happening, and the money, the political money, is beginning to move. But before we get to the money, we need to understand the rules of the game, because the rules themselves are being shaped. Let's talk about the architecture of Nigerian presidential power, because this is where the real game is played. Under the 1999 Constitution, the President of Nigeria controls appointments to some of the most consequential institutions in the country: INEC commissioners, the Economic and Financial Commission's leadership, the central bank governor, the heads of security agencies, DSS, NIA, the service chiefs, the Inspector General of Police. Now, some of these go through Senate confirmation, but here's the gray area most people don't interrogate. Confirmation is different from control. A Senate that is largely aligned with the executive, as the current one is, becomes less of a check and more of a processing unit. INEC is constitutionally independent. Its chairman is appointed for a fixed term and can only be removed through a defined process. That's the letter of the law. But INEC operates through resident electoral commissioners in every state, and those appointments flow from the presidency. The texture of how an election is administered, the speed of result transmission, the interpretation of technicalities, these are shaped by people. Here's what surprises most people when they actually look at it. The 2022 Electoral Act, widely praised as a reform, actually created new pressure points. The mandatory electronic transmission of results was a win for transparency. But the same act created ambiguities around what constitutes a valid return that were exploited extensively in 2023 tribunal arguments. The constitutional framework that's most relevant right now is the interplay between federal allocation and governorial loyalty. Governors who control states need federal money to function. That's the economic leash. and Tinubu, as a former governor himself, understands it better than almost anyone alive in Nigerian politics today. And that understanding of how governors think, that's exactly where his 2027 strategy begins. This is the part of the video I want you to pay close attention to, because what I'm about to lay out isn't speculation, it's pattern recognition based on what Tinubu has done at every level of his political career. The Tinubu playbook has 4 consistent components. 1. Control the structure, not just the narrative. In Lagos, Tinubu didn't just win elections, he built a political machine, ward level, local government level, that persisted across administrations. The Lagos APC structure survives individual personalities because it was built as an institution, not a personality cult. What we're seeing now is an attempt to replicate that model at the federal level. This means controlling APC governorship primaries in key states, installing loyalists in positions that look administrative but are politically critical, and, this is important, creating enough dependency relationships that potential defectors calculate it's more expensive to leave than to stay. 2. Manage the North through economic dependency, not emotional loyalty. The Tinubu-Shettima ticket was a calculated bet. It addressed the northern Muslim vote, but Tinubu knows that northern loyalty in Nigerian politics is transactional at the elite level. The governors, the senators, the traditional rulers who influence bloc voting, they respond to federal patronage. The NNPCC restructuring, the infrastructure spending patterns, the federal appointments, if you map them, you see a deliberate geographic spread designed to keep northern political elite stakeholders inside the tent, not because they love Tinubu, because it is currently profitable to support him. But there's one northern bloc that this calculus may not hold for, and I'll come back to that in the strategic outlook section because it may be the biggest variable in 2027. 3. Neutralize the opposition before it unifies. The opposition's fundamental problem in 2023 was fragmentation. PDP and Labour split the anti-APC vote. Tinubu's team knows that the nightmare scenario for 2027 is a unified opposition candidate, particularly one who can hold the southeast and appeal to the north. What's the counter? You encourage fragmentation. You make PDP's internal crisis worse by pulling key figures toward APC defections, which we've already seen happening. You keep the Labour Party financially squeezed and litigiously occupied, and you ensure that any potential opposition coalition never finds a single figure that all factions can agree on. Is this cynical? Absolutely. Is it politics? Yes, and Tinubu has been doing this since the 1990s. 4. Create enough visible wins or visible scapegoats. This is the economic dimension. Tinubu can't win 2027 on pain. He needs either genuine improvement in living standards or a convincing narrative that things are improving and that the pain was someone else's fault. The removal of fuel subsidy was framed as the previous administration's failure, a ticking bomb he inherited. The Naira depreciation was framed as necessary medicine. Whether these framings hold by 2027 depends heavily on where petrol prices, food inflation, and the exchange rate sit 18 months from now. Here's the political math. If the Naira stabilizes and petrol is available, even at high prices, the "we absorbed the pain and turned the corner" narrative becomes sellable to a Nigerian electorate that has historically rewarded incumbents who can point to visible infrastructure or economic stabilization. The uncomfortable truth that Tinubu's critics don't want to acknowledge is this: economic pain does not automatically translate into electoral defeat in Nigeria. The 2015 election, which removed Goodluck Jonathan, was fought on security and corruption narratives, not purely economic ones. And the evidence from 2023 is that even amid hardship, the structural advantages of incumbency, federal character calculations, security agency deployment, logistics infrastructure are decisive. The silent players.
No analysis of 2027 is complete without naming the interests that aren't making noise but are fully invested in outcomes. The Lagos business community, the Dangote-adjacent, marina-based financial and trading elite have a complex relationship with Tinubu. Some funded his rise. They need a stable naira and a predictable policy environment. If the economy does not improve materially, some of that funding could shift. The DSP political class in the South-South, the oil bloc, will be watching how petroleum reform lands on their region's revenues. The PIB implementation and its effect on host communities and state allocations will shape South-South governors' decisions on who to support. And then there's the security establishment. The military's institutional preferences in Nigerian politics have historically been quiet but not invisible. They don't pick presidents, but they create environments that favor or disfavor outcomes. And the current security situation, banditry, terrorism, secessionist agitation, gives this administration both a challenge and an opportunity to demonstrate state capacity. Now, zooming out from the strategy table to what this all means for Nigerian audience. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let's be direct about what this means for Nigeria as a country, not just as a chessboard. On the federal-state balance, the current administration has shown a preference for assertive federal power. The suspension of the Rivers State governor, the interventions in opposition-controlled states, the use of federal agencies in ways that state government experience as politically targeted, these are not accidental. They represent a deliberate reassertion of federal dominance in a system that has been slowly, imperfectly drifting towards state autonomy. If Tinubu wins 2027 with this playbook intact, the signal to the political class is clear. Federal power is supreme, and governors who break from the federal line face consequences. That has long-term implications for how Nigeria's quasi-federal system actually functions in practice. On economic consequences, the political economy of an election year is a known pattern in Nigeria. Federal spending spikes, contracts flow, visible projects get launched or commissioned. The question for 2027 is whether Tinubu has the fiscal space to run that playbook, given the debt profile and the revenue constraints he's operating under. If he doesn't, or if the World Bank and IMF pressure creates austerity constraints, the traditional election year spending surge may be muted. On inter-ethnic and interfaith dynamics, a second Tinubu term would mean 8 years of a Yoruba-led presidency. The North, which dominated the presidency from 1999 to 2015 and again from 2015 to 2023, would be watching the zoning conversation very carefully. Unofficial power rotation is not in the constitution, but it is deeply embedded in elite political culture. The APC will need a credible answer for what a second Tinubu term means for northern ambitions in 2031. There's a genuine international dimension here, and it's worth spending 2 minutes on it. Nigeria's 2027 election will be watched closely by Western governments, particularly the US and UK, for one specific reason. The global pattern of incumbents using state institutions to entrench power has made democratic backsliding a live concern in African political monitoring. The US has used visa restrictions before in response to the 2023 election as a soft pressure tool. The question is whether that lever gets deployed again and whether it has any meaningful deterrent effect on Nigerian political actors. The IMF and World Bank relationship matters here too. Nigeria is in a complex engagement with multilateral creditors. The conditionalities attached to any future support programs will, to some degree, constrain what an election year government can spend and how it can manage the exchange rate. A government that is under fiscal pressure internationally cannot run the same domestic patronage machine without consequence.
For Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly in the UK, US, and Canada, The 2027 election is arriving in a context where diaspora political remittances and civic engagement are at an all-time high. The PVC registration drives abroad, the social media mobilization, the fundraising, this is a diaspora that has decided it has a stake. The question is whether that stake translates into organized electoral influence domestically or remains primarily expressive.
Let me address the 3 things people are getting wrong about this story. Misconception 1. Nigerians are too angry to re-elect Tinubu. I understand why people feel this way. The suffering is real and documented. But electoral anger in Nigeria has historically been channeled through ethnic and regional identity more than economic grievance. The voters most economically damaged by current policies are not necessarily the voters whose blocks are most decisive in first-past-the-post distributed plurality elections. Economic suffering does not automatically produce unified opposition voting. It often produces apathy, low turnout, which helps organized political machines. Misconception 2. The opposition will unite this time. I want this to be true. I think many Nigerians want this to be true. But there is no structural incentive for unity as long as PDP and Labour are competing for the same base and have leaders with irreconcilable personal ambitions. Unity requires a candidate that nobody in the coalition has a veto reason to reject. That person does not currently exist in visible form. Could they emerge? Yes, but emergent alone isn't enough. Organization, funding, and state-level structure take years to build. Misconception 3. The economy will force a change. The strongest version of this argument holds that if inflation stays above 20%, if unemployment continues to rise, if the naira doesn't recover, then no amount of political machinery can save Tinubu. This is the argument I take most seriously, but it depends on a counterfactual, that there is an organized, credible, well-funded alternative that can capitalize on that pain. Without that, pain without direction just becomes noise. Here's the reframe that changes the entire analysis. The 2027 election will not be decided by who Nigerians are most angry at. It will be decided by who builds the most capable machine in the most decisive states. And right now, only one side is actively building. So, does Tinubu already have the architecture to win 2027? The honest answer is, he has the foundation of it. The completion of that architecture depends on 3 things. The northern variable I flagged earlier, the block that doesn't fit neatly into the patronage calculus, is the northwest, specifically the Kano-Kaduna corridor. Kano went heavily for Abba Kabir Yusuf and the NNPP in 2023. That represents a genuine grassroots northern resistance to the APC establishment that money alone cannot easily buy. If that movement consolidates and finds a presidential vehicle, it becomes the most disruptive element in Tinubu's coalition math. What signals to watch? First, APC governorship primaries in 2025 and 2026. If Tinubu's preferred candidates win cleanly, the machine is working. If there are contested primaries and defections, that's a crack in the structure. Second, the naira and food prices 12 months from now. If the exchange rate is still above 1,500 naira to the dollar and a bag of rice is still at current prices, the economic narrative becomes very hard to manage. Third, who emerges as the opposition candidate and when? A candidate that declares early, builds structure, and refuses to be fragmented changes the game entirely. Best case for Tinubu. Economy stabilizes enough to claim a turnaround. Northern elite loyalty holds. Opposition fragments again. He wins with a larger share than 2023, perhaps 42 to 45% in a multi-candidate race. Worst case for Tinubu. Economy stays painful. Kano-led northern resistance finds a presidential vehicle.
Lagos, his political home, faces unprecedented anti-APC pressure, and a unity opposition candidate emerges with sufficient structure. In that scenario, 2027 becomes genuinely competitive in a way that no Nigerian presidential election has been since 2015. Long-term impact: if nothing changes, Nigeria drifts towards a dominant party system anchored in federal incumbency advantages, not authoritarian, but with increasingly constrained electoral competition. That's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not the democratic consolidation that Nigeria's constitution envisions. I opened this video with a question. Has Tinubu already built the machine that wins him 2027 regardless of his popularity? Here's my measured answer. Not yet, but he's building it faster than his opposition is building anything. The numbers, the vote share required, the states needed, the coalition math don't lie. 2027 is winnable for Tinubu, not because Nigerians are satisfied, but because winning Nigerian elections has never been primarily about satisfaction. It's been about structure, resources, institutional positioning, and the fragmentation of alternatives. If you believe that's wrong, if you believe the economic pain will produce a different result, then the burden on the opposition is enormous. They need to show before the end of 2026 that they can unify, fund, and structure a challenge. The clock is running. What do you think? Does Tinubu win 2027? Drop your take in the comments. I read them all, and the best responses might end up in a follow-up video. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor. Share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Naija Newsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.